Sergei Viktorovich, здравствуйте.
Sergei Viktorovich, good afternoon. I represent TASS, and if possible, I wish to put two questions forward. Given the statements from various parties that were delivered, the statements made by various countries, including here in General Assembly, can Vladimir Zelensky count on returning to the borders of 2014? What is the situation on the ground in DPR right now, specifically in the so-called strategic triangle? Well, as regards to the 2022 borders, I don't think anybody is really counting on that, because counting on restoration of those borders would be politically blind and would demonstrate an utter lack of understanding about what is taking place. Russia is upholding our legitimate interests, the legitimate interests of the people whom the Nazis in Kyiv, after the seizure of power through the coup, people they labeled terrorists, specimens, non-humans, whose children, through the words of Poroshenko, they threatened to put into the basements while the children of Ukrainian elite eat candy, travel in nice cars, and go to nice schools. I would like to state that there's all this talk about restoration of borders of any certain year, and these discussions have been ongoing for a number of years, and these discussions all have a common link. Ukrainian leaders who seized power after February 2014 illegally consistently lied and derailed all of the agreements that had been arrived at in February 2014. Had there been implementation of the agreement that was signed between the president and opposition, this which was guaranteed by Germany, France, and Poland, had this been honored and fulfilled, Ukraine would have been within its 1991 borders. Then there would have been no events, there would have been no uprising in Crimea of those who refused to recognize the illegitimate authorities, because illegitimate authorities would not have come about. The war would not have started when those who did not recognize the illegitimate authorities were bombed by the Kyiv regime. They were burned alive in their homes, as was the case in Odessa in the trade building when 50 people were burned alive. The planes were bombing Lugansk. Artillery was targeting all the territories, and this is categorically prohibited. The use of an army in a domestic conflict, of course, constitutes a violation of IHL, and then there were the Minsk agreements. If the Minsk agreements, which guaranteed Germany and France, yet again, this was sanctioned by the Security Council, approved by the Security Council. Had they been implemented by the upper crust of the Kyiv regime, then Ukraine would have been within the 1991 borders, minus Crimea, because there was a referendum held in Crimea. Nobody is disputing that. In 2014, I spoke with John Kerry. This is no secret now. He said that there's a need to forget about Crimea. Let's talk about Donbass. This was undermined, derailed, and Ukraine became even a little bit smaller. And had the agreements been implemented that Ukraine itself proposed in April of 2022, which we agreed to, then Ukraine would have also been within the 1991 borders, minus Crimea, and now minus a larger part of Donbass. But Ukraine torpedoed that too, refusing to implement its own initiative. So there's no discussion of the 2022 borders. So we're talking about the borders which are enshrined in the Constitution of the Russian Federation. What was the second? The second question was having to do with the situation in DPR, specifically the strategic triangle, as it is called. How would you describe that? I will not comment on the situation on the battlefield. First of all, we have been here for a number of days already. But second, this is what the Ministry of Defense has been doing on a regular basis. Military correspondents provide reports about developments, so I'll leave it to them.
Take one question from far away, please.
Thank you very much, Foreign Minister. Mark Stone from Sky News.
I wonder if I could persuade you to answer a question in English, perhaps. President Trump has called you called Russia a paper tiger, has said that European countries should shoot down Russian planes if they violate European airspace. Do you see that as a provocation? And what would happen if Russian planes are shot down? Thank you, sir.
First of all, we are the United Nations, and the Russian language is an official language of the United Nations, as is the English language. So I'm very grateful to all of you for your respect for our right, our opportunity to use this language. Frankly speaking, I can't necessarily follow all of the statements that have been made, but I do remember a day or so after the statement was uttered, paper tiger, the next day, President Trump was asked, does he continue to think Russia is a paper tiger? And the response there was negative. So if each nuance in the rhetorical rhetoric is addressed, well, I already responded to what I think of certain statements from President Trump. In public diplomacy, there are various tools being leveraged, various means, various various procedures, and as if President Trump allowed for the bombing of Russian Federation, intercepting drones, planes. When a drone flies not over our territory, if it crossed somebody's border, but outside of our airspace, probably everybody has a right to do what they deem necessary with this drone for providing for their own security. But if there are attempts to down any flying object, any object over our territory, in our airspace, then I think people will very much regret it undertaking such an egregious violation of our territorial integrity and sovereignty.
Sergei, добрый день.
Good afternoon. If I may, two questions. The first question, German authorities have not concealed the fact that they have been engaged in active militarization of their country. What do you think? Why is this being done? And what are they trying to achieve? And the second question, you've already mentioned recently. You talked about privatization of virtually all of the leadership of the United Nations by the West. What could Russia do in order to change that situation? Thank you. On militarization of Germany, we repeatedly set out our concerns, our very deep concerns. And not only is there a process of militarization underway there are blatant indicators of re-Nazification, which are being observed. Why is this being done? Probably with the same aim that Hitler set for himself, to bring all of Europe under his control and to try to inflict a strategic defeat with Hitler, with the Soviet Union, and with the modern-day Germany and the rest of those, the chorus, the main soloists in the European Union and NATO. Now they're trying to inflict a defeat on Russia. Merz, I think it was yesterday, mentioned that we are not yet in a state of war, but we are no longer in a state of peace. The militaristic rhetoric is being ratcheted up with each passing day. And this statement was reiterated on a number of occasions now, that he pushed through amendments into the Constitution. Now it is possible to spend more funds on weaponry and development of military infrastructure, military capabilities. And he proudly stated, the Chancellor, that his goal is to once again to make Germany the main military engine of Europe. And when a person in a country which perpetrated the crimes of Nazism, fascism, the Holocaust, genocide, when such a person says that Germany again needs to become a great military power, of course, he has an atrophied historical memory, and that is exceedingly dangerous.
What was the second question again?
Слово.
Руководство секретариату
Посмотрите.
Well, look, I've said this quite frankly. We say this very openly. There are many positions at the ASG USG level, they seem to be distributed among various continents and countries, but there are a few key positions that directly influence and impact the functioning of the UN Secretariat and that dictate the decisions that the Secretariat makes when it comes to accepting member states. When the Secretariat recommends something, member states generally tend to support that. Our Secretary General is the citizen of a NATO member state. The head of the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs is a citizen of a NATO member state as well. The head of the Department of Peacekeeping Operations is also a citizen of a NATO member country. The head of the whole humanitarian wing of the UN, which carries out operations all over the world, is a UK citizen, also NATO member state citizen. The head of the Department of Security, which is also very key to the work of the organization, the whole system, is also a citizen of a NATO member state. I mentioned that a UK citizen has inherited essentially the leadership of the humanitarian wing of the UN. And Mr. Guterres is currently promoting the UN 80 initiative, which contains a number of fairly radical proposals that require very careful study and analysis. And this analysis must be transparent and must involve all member states. We put forth an initiative for a resolution to this end, and it was adopted. This process cannot go on in secret. And to lead this process, Antonio Guterres has appointed another Undersecretary General who just happens to be a UK citizen as well. These key posts, they should be the areas of work that should be distributed more evenly between the various member states. I think this is clear. And at the last session of the General Assembly, I spoke about the need for reform of those principles that dictate the composition of the Secretariat. The main principle right now is the size of the population, the GDP per capita. So the bigger you are, the more positions you have. And of course, this is logical to some extent, but there is also the principle of the sovereign equality of states, which we've already talked about today. And the Secretariat needs to have staff members that are appointed based on their professional qualities and not necessarily on their nationality. But this principle of equitable geographical distribution must be upheld. And right now, when it comes to the top ranks of the Secretariat, that principle is not being complied with at all.
So much.